Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin in 10 minutes. AIPAC Policy Conference. It is the place where we gather to learn, to listen, and to lobby. Here, we see the best expression of American citizen activism. Here, we proudly participate in the political system to make America and Israel stronger and safer. As America's pro-Israel lobby, we are made up of Democrats and Republicans, progressives, conservatives, and independents. We are politically diverse for a reason. We need each other to be effective. We need each other to ensure that we have relationships with everyone in a position of leadership in Washington. So America and Israel will continue to stand together today and tomorrow. During the conference, you will hear from Democrats and Republicans. You will hear from elected officials whose opinions you support and others who you disagree with. We must remember that bipartisanship is critical to our success. How we treat the AIPAC members sitting beside us is just as important as how we treat those on our stages. So whether you choose to stand and cheer or to sit quietly, each speaker is our guest. You may disagree with the person sitting next to you, but you are united when it comes to strengthening America's relationship with Israel. That is our shared vision and a goal that connects all of us for good. Ladies and gentlemen, will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin in 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Arthur Stark.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to bring you greetings from the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. So here's a fast fact about the Conference of Presidents that many don't know. The conference was first established in the 1950s due to strong pressure from the Eisenhower administration to provide a central address, a consensus voice for the Jewish community. In the ensuing years, and especially in the last 3 decades, under the visionary leadership of our CEO, Malcolm Hoenlein, that's right, the conference has become the big tent for the leaders of more than 50 major American Jewish organizations. We represent a broad spectrum of the American Jewish community, collectively pursuing one mission: to ensure the well-being of Israel and the Jewish people. Our motto is strength through unity. However, unity does not suggest unanimity. Rather, it is a recognition that we have far more in common than we have differences. AIPAC plays a unique and important role in the Conference of Presidents, as it has in Washington, ensuring that leaders in both parties understand and support the strategic value of the U.S.-Israel alliance. For 2 decades, I've been a staunch supporter of AIPAC, and now a member of AIPAC's board. As chairman of the Conference of Presidents, I have gained an even greater appreciation for AIPAC's work through our uniquely close and productive relationship. Each week on the AIPAC board call, I witnessed the engagement and dedication of AIPAC's board members, led by Mort, and the trust that has been earned by Howard and his team. When I was elected as conference chairman, I often heard that this is the most difficult period in our history. No doubt, our challenges are many, but who could have imagined the many blessings we have? How many of us would not even be here today had our parents or grandparents not survived the Holocaust? They, of blessed memory, could not have imagined this powerfully significant gathering. How different history might have been had Israel and AIPAC existed then. Who could imagine? Many of us remember when the attendance here was in the hundreds. Who could have imagined that we would approach the 18,000 gathered here today? And who could have imagined Israel's diplomatic standing on the world stage? The predictions of Israel's isolation have been debunked. The Conference of Presidents has traveled around the world, and we've witnessed the embrace of Israel's know-how, technology, and innovation. Israel is indeed understood on every continent as a light unto the nations, a model and an inspiration to many. I'm delighted that we're joined here by many representatives from the diplomatic community who are working together with America and Israel to forge a better future for our world. And who would have imagined that following the American lead, we would see more and more countries signaling, as we heard yesterday, the inevitable move of their embassies to the capital of the State of Israel, Jerusalem. We thank President Trump for his historic leadership in recognizing the centrality of Jerusalem to the Jewish state. We also commend the bold and courageous pronouncements of EU Council President, Romanian Prime Minister Dăncilă. And we thank President Trump for his signing just a few hours ago the formal recognition of Israel's control of the Golan. In doing so, the President has addressed the reality on the ground that the notion of the Golan ever being in the dangerous and volatile hands of Hezbollah, Iran, and other militias would be truly unimaginable. Yet, nothing can be taken for granted. As we've seen in recent weeks, even here in our own United States, voices will arise with baseless, age-old accusations, nefarious and unfounded, of dual loyalty. My friends, we will not be intimidated. We will double down. We will not fail to exercise our right and our duty as American citizens to advocate for this cause. Israel is not only a Jewish cause, it is an American cause. Americans support Israel because of shared values. Israel and America are the staunchest of allies. And Israel is an oasis of democracy and human rights in its region. There is no better way to combat pernicious stereotypes than by speaking out as American citizens. All of these hard-to-imagine outcomes do not just happen. They are the culmination of decades of tireless activism by generations of pro-Israel advocates like you. So, let us rededicate ourselves to the important work ahead. There are many challenges before us, but by being here in Washington to meet our elected leaders in Congress and to express appreciation, we have taken the single most important step to addressing these threats head-on. Together, there is no limit to what we can accomplish. So once again, on behalf of the Conference of Presidents, thank you all for your friendship, your partnership, and your continued dedication to our common mission. Thank you.
Please welcome freshman members of the House of Representatives Elaine Luria, Dan Crenshaw, Susie Lee, Denver Riggleman, David Trone, and Tim Burchett.
One more over. Pretty big hall.
At a time when America is so divided, each of us made the decision to step forward. I have served our country. I was one of the first women to serve the entirety of my career on combatant ships. Each of us believes that participating in our government is not just our responsibility, it's our calling.
Like Elaine, I'm a veteran of the United States Navy. I was a U.S. Navy SEAL. My experiences overseas have imbued in me a deep love of country and desire to serve, both in combat and in Congress. Here on stage, we have Democrats and Republicans coming together from Virginia, Texas, Maryland, Nevada, and Tennessee. At a time when America needs it the most, we believe that it is our mission to find common ground.
As a mother of two, I ran for office as an education advocate, committed to working with my colleagues to advance solutions that impact all of our children. Foreign policy wasn't the focus of my campaign, but Congress cannot neglect this issue or America's role in the world. I'm fortunate to have many great friends who are active in the Las Vegas AIPAC community. They helped underscore the importance of the U.S.-Israeli relationship before I ran for office.
I first traveled to Israel in 1996 when the nation was in the midst of a series of terrorist bus bombings. That time I was serving in the United States Air Force. And I never forgot the strength shown by the people I've met. All these years later, as I embarked on my campaign, I remained committed to a safe and secure Israel. And I knew I had an obligation to understand the issues impacting the region. For each of us here, the people of AIPAC offered themselves as a resource and a partner, and for that, we say thank you.
I have been to Israel many times. My love for Israel-U.S. relationship cannot be expressed in words alone. I believe deeply America is stronger because of its relationship with Israel. But understanding Israel and the relationship is best achieved firsthand. There's no comparison to seeing it and studying it for yourself. So even before we took the oath of office, we made a commitment.
This past December, the six of us traveled to Israel together with AIPAC's Education Foundation. It was my first visit, but I can honestly say there is nothing like seeing Israel for yourself. We visited Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and everywhere in between. We saw an ancient homeland so central to my faith and others, and a startup nation so central to all of our future.
We met with military scholars, officials, journalists, and Israeli leaders from across the political spectrum. We had honest and real conversations about the issues impacting the region. We stood on Israel's borders, looking into Syria and Lebanon.
We traveled to the Gaza Strip. We met with families impacted by years of sustained rocket and terror attacks. We saw firsthand one of the tunnels being dug by Hamas into Israeli territory, with the sole purpose of infiltrating Israel and killing civilians. Few of us can imagine what it is like living near these tunnels. But we are proud that America and Israel are working together to stop these rocket attacks and destroy these tunnels.
This trip was comprehensive. It gave us a wide-angle view of the challenges and the opportunities that Israel and America have in the region. But the trip was more than just learning about Israel. We learned about ourselves and became friends with one another. I love you, Denver.
I love you, Susie. I do love her.
I'm telling somebody's wife.
We forged relationships that will be crucial in finding common ground on this and other important issues facing our country. You gave us hope that the bipartisanship that exists here is possible everywhere.
So tomorrow, when you go to Capitol Hill, know that you are doing the most American thing possible. You are using your voice and advocating for what you believe is right.
When you get home and you're once again bombarded with stories about how America's divided, how Democrats and Republicans don't work together, remember this picture and remember that you all made it possible. Thank y'all.
Officer Melanie Gullick.
In the fall of 2017, I was honored to join a group of Christian leaders from around the United States on an AIEF-sponsored trip to Israel. I've served in Afghanistan and know what an important strategic partner I know what an important strategic partner the State of Israel is to the United States. So I was excited to experience a land that is so important to both my faith and my country. A few days into the trip, we drove south to a tiny village that lies only a few hundred yards from the Gaza border. The proximity is startling, particularly when you factor in the hundreds of rocket attacks and other attacks of terror they have faced over the years. As a gunner from my forward operating base in Afghanistan, I know what it means to have to run for cover when rocket sirens go off. I was trained and prepared for those moments. But in this community, and as we know from recent events, communities throughout Israel, civilians, men, women, and lots of children have to face the same threats I faced in a combat zone. It's beyond hard to imagine living like that, but they do. It's their home, and they're not leaving. In so many ways, their story is the story of Israel. So tonight, instead of focusing on threats that are a few hundred yards away, we turn the cameras around and introduce you to the people of Nahal Oz.
"95% heaven, 5% hell. That's day-to-day life in Nahal Oz. I arrived to Nahal Oz almost 16 years ago. I came here to finish my degree, and I fell in love. I fell in love with this community. I fell in love with this place. Then I met my husband too. I am a mother of 2 beautiful children. In Nahal Oz, we have a dairy farm, and we have 25 acres of crops. It starts with the green, open spaces and the beautiful outdoor that we have here. But the real beauty of Nahal Oz are the people.
The community is an amazing community. It's a mix of young and old people. It's a supporting community.
You always say hello to everyone. You know everybody, and everybody really cares about you.
There are so many great things about raising kids in Nahal Oz. The education system is amazing. They have so many friends. And speak about sense of security. When they were 3 years old, I already let them go outside by themselves. How many mothers can say that?
It's complicated to describe the feeling that you are located 700 meters away from Gaza. But once you decide to come and to live in this place, I mean, you put it aside and you live.
The rocket attacks on Nahal Oz started around the year 2000. The peak was during Protective Edge, the summer of 2014. Friday afternoon, August 22nd, 2014, was, I think, the most difficult moment this community has ever had. The loss of a 4.5-year-old child was something that left the community broken. I think that most of the people of the kibbutz didn't think that we would be able to get back on our feet after that. We had many families that decided to leave. As the operation progressed, different terror attack tunnels began to be found. They were found filled with ammunition. One of them was found with 3 motorcycles inside, less than 1 kilometer from my children's playground. The newest invention are the kites and balloons, which come to our area with fire, and they set fires to fields. The damage to nature and animals is unbelievable, unbelievable. Before Protective Edge, we were about 330 residents. After Protective Edge, we dropped to 220-something. So like any other person in Nahal Oz, we had the thought crossed my mind. Should I stay here? Should I go? After a split second, I understood that no matter what, I cannot leave the kibbutz. This is my home. Get used to it. This is my home.
We have decided in this kibbutz to live without fences. You can go to my neighbors and you don't need to cross any fence because the kibbutz is open. This is the message we want to share with everybody. Everything is free, and this land is for all of us.
We started gathering families. It was just handpicking families from around the country. That was the beginning of it.
Most of my childhood was here, so I know Nahal Oz, and I always talked about Nahal Oz. A lot. And we always wanted to raise our family in the kibbutz.
We have found true friends, and we are well adapted to this place.
This year, we have had 14 new babies, which is amazing for such a small community. Today, we are over 440 families. What made people come here mostly is the warm, welcoming community. And this is the reputation that Nahal Oz has today. And I think this is the reason that people are still coming.
For us, 7.
Ladies and gentlemen, Osharit Sabag and her family. Please welcome from the United States House of Representatives, Appropriations Committee Chair Nita Lowey and Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Elliot Engel.
Thank you. We are honored this evening to be here with so many friends. For 30 years now, Elliot and I have served together in the Congress, coming in as members of the same freshman class. In our years in Congress, we have seen many changes. 1989 was a time before the internet. email, cell phones. It was before terrorism had struck our shores and our city. And it was before Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords.
And while much has changed, much remains the same. In 1989, like today, Americans from all corners of our country, from both sides of the aisle, all supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship, gathered here in Washington every spring. Our numbers were much smaller then, and so was the room, but our mission was the same. And yes, Nita and I say our, because back then we were here too. I may have served for 30 years in Congress, but 30 years in Congress, but this is my 32nd consecutive AIPAC policy conference.
How did I get so tall here? We hoped that by now this work would be easier, but it isn't. Today, the work AIPAC does, that each of you does, is as critical as ever. And Elliot and I are as committed as we have ever been throughout our congressional careers.
You represent the very best of American democracy. With your passion, knowledge, commitment, and numbers, you help all of us in Congress to understand what the majority of Americans already know and support the importance of the U.S.-Israel alliance and the power of bipartisan support. America is stronger because we have a dependable, democratic ally like Israel in a region characterized by instability and brutality. America is stronger because you take the time and effort to fight back against those who try to question that basic reality. Thank you for being such spectacular American citizens. Thank you.
Elliot and I share many things in common. We take pride in our work. We take pride in our Jewish heritage. We also take pride in the opportunities we now share as committee chairs. I serve as the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, and Elliot is chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Two of the most important foreign policy committees in the Congress. And it is our honor to lead the committees that write nearly every piece of legislation that advances the strong U.S.-Israel relationship. Which benefits the United States in meaningful and immediate ways.
And as we move legislation, we need all of you to keep making the case to our colleagues and to everyone to keep sharing this incredible story with your members of Congress, to build relationships on both sides of the aisle. This is how our democracy works. That is how America works.
Joining together here today gives us strength in our common and critical purpose. We are a team.
And so when others ask, why did you come here? Why do you care? You already know the answer. We are American, and we are proudly pro-Israel.
How did they put me up here?
please welcome former Chief of Staff of the CIA and the Department of Defense, Jeremy Bash.
Good evening. This is my 29th AIPAC Policy Conference. Our next two guests are trailblazers who know the true meaning of service. First, as decorated veterans, and now members of the United States Senate. Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth is an Iraq War veteran, a Purple Heart recipient and former Assistant Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Before her election to the United States Senate in 2016, she represented Illinois' 8th District in the House of Representatives for 2 terms. Arizona Senator Martha McSally served 26 years in the United States Air Force. She served in both Iraq and Afghanistan and was the first female fighter pilot to fly in combat and the first to command a fighter squadron in combat in U.S. history. Senator McSally also served in the House representing Arizona's 2nd District for 4 years. And tonight, the two of them will join us to discuss critical security issues relating to the U.S.-Israel relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm AIPAC welcome to our guests, Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth and Arizona Senator Martha McSally. Hey, Senator. Hey, Senator. Well, great. What a warm welcome, and welcome back to Policy Conference. As we heard in your introductions, both of you have had distinguished military careers. You've both been pilots in combat. And I want to start by asking each of you, I'll start with you, Senator McSally, how does that experience impact your work in Congress on national security and your support for Israel?
Well, first, thanks for having us here today. It's great. There's a couple of female combat veterans here working together on many issues in the Senate and in the House before. Well, I will say, first, I was deployed to the Middle East 5 times, and so I've seen firsthand the dangerous neighborhood that Israel is in. It's a long story, but I fought for 8 years to make sure that our U.S. servicewomen didn't have to wear burqas when off base in Saudi Arabia. I know firsthand, Israel is the only democracy in the region that protects human rights and minority rights.
Right.
Thank you. And those of us who serve, we understand the threat, I think, like many others don't. Maybe they understand it theoretically, but they've never actually been there. Look, I ran for Congress originally because I was tired of yelling at the television. I want to be a part of solving problems to keep our country safe, and in this case, make sure we protect our strong and faithful ally, Israel, in the region. And so we have, I think, unique perspectives and a unique approach. You know, we both served to protect America, to protect our way of life, to protect freedoms and our vital national security interests, and that includes in the region the protection of Israel.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth.
Well, you know, having served in the military for over 2 decades, I learned to take care of my troops first and foremost, making sure that I watch out for their well-being, their families' well-being. And that basic function of a military officer is something that I bring to Congress when I think about serving my entire state and my entire nation. And that means that we have to look at the totality of the whole issue. And for me, that means that I have to reach out across the aisle to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to find ways to come together. And Israel, being a supporter of the United States and us being a supporter of Israel is one of those uniting things that can happen across the aisle. The fact of the matter is, Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East, and it is something that we can come together on. And so we can then come together and talk about issues of national security, not just in terms of more tanks and guns and helicopters to the United States, but also talking about the fact that we do need to sell more defensive countermeasures to our ally in Israel to make sure that they can defend their own citizens. And let me just pause briefly and just say how much I am praying for the families and those who were affected by the rocket attack that happened today, the 7 injured. And of course, it's not just those who are injured, but know that we stand firmly with Israel.
The first bill taken up by the Senate this year, and I'll start with you, Senator Duckworth, was this S1, Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act of 2019. You voted for it, as did you, Senator McSally. Why? Why was that an important vote for you to take? And let's give her them both a round of applause for that vote.
Well, it was a hard vote for me to take, and it was an easy vote for me to take. The hard vote for me to take is there were issues in it that I thought had serious implications for First Amendment rights, but the totality of the bill was this. It is about strengthening America's ally with Israel. It provided for greater, more definitive support of Israel. It provided for support for Jordan. It provided for our own national security long term. And so for me, that was the easy vote to take, in that at the end of the day, it was about the totality of the bill, and the bill was much better for not just Israel, but also for the United States security.
Senator?
Yeah, well, let me say it was a very easy vote for me to take. We were codifying the MOU between us and Israel, and I will also say that I see that as the floor and not the ceiling of our strong partnership and support to Israel. Because the MOU wasn't quite as strong as I had hoped, but I really think for us to come together in a bipartisan way to codify that, make sure that they maintain their quantitative military edge, and that we're able to counter the BDS movement around the country and the world. So that legislation allowed states like Arizona, for example, they're working some additional legislation they did in the past. It was caught in the courts, but it allows them to choose to say, you know what, we're not going to do business with anybody who's a part of this BDS movement, and I thought it was really important for us to speak on that issue.
I want to turn to the topic of missile defense. Part of my family lives in central Israel. They were in the bomb shelter this morning when the rocket fell in Mishmeret, about 2 miles from where they live. Senator McSally, part of the Iron Dome system is built in Arizona. You know how critical Iron Dome has been. Talk to us about the importance of missile defense given the rocket threat in the region.
Well, absolutely, and as Tammy said, my hearts and our prayers are with the families who right now, there's rocket attacks that are ongoing right now. So we need to be vigilant and we need to be in prayer. And I am so impressed by the young men and women. We visited an Iron Dome battery when I was there, and seeing these teenagers making decisions, split-second decisions, to intercept these rockets. Thousands of rockets aimed at Israel. The one yesterday, about 75-mile range north of Tel Aviv. This is like we haven't seen before. That threat is very real every day. So some of the partnership that's happening between Rafael and Raytheon is actually in my district, or in my state in Arizona, continuing to partner together for Iron Dome, David Sling, and now the Army is moving forward because there's real-world experience every single day, every single year in Israel as to the effectiveness. We need to continue to strengthen that partnership, grow, learn from the lessons that are happening on the ground with the IDF to make sure that we protect Israel and all the citizens against these awful terrorist attacks.
I mean, Senator Duckworth, it's a combat zone. You know more about combat than everybody in this room put together. How do you feel about this moment and what's facing the state of Israel?
Well, I think that there's an existential threat to the state of Israel, and it's not just this moment, but it's every single day from the founding of Israel. And this is why we must remain strongly allied with Israel. Look, I was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. I know better than most what rockets do to a human body, and this is why I think it is incredibly important that we in the Senate, we in the legislature, support Israel, support Israel's defensive capabilities. This is why I am calling for more sales of defensive countermeasures for Israel so that they can truly protect the people.
And Senator McSally, you also flew combat missions and have set historic records for women capability in combat, and you know the region very well. Talk to us for a minute about one player in the region, Iran, and the impact that Iran has in the wider Middle East.
Look, Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world and continues to be an existential threat to Israel, and we need to stop them from being a threat in the region. I did not support the crappy Iran deal. Sorry, I'm a fighter pilot. and I talk like one. And I supported the Trump administration getting out of that deal. As you all know, it didn't address their missile capabilities, their ballistic missile capabilities, their maligned activities in the region, their support to the terrorist organizations of Hamas and Hezbollah, and support to the awful Assad regime. Across the way, they want to just have a bridge to be a threat to Israel, and we need to stop them. So pulling out of the deal was the right thing to do. And I'm disappointed in our European allies for them trying to find a workaround, because they are the real threat in this region, and we need to squeeze the vice grip tighter and tighter on them, using all elements of national power, economic, diplomatic, deterrence, whatever it takes to stop that threat from Israel.
And Senator Duckworth, your perspective on Iran and the threat that Iran poses in the region to the United States.
Oh, I think that the Iranian regime is trying very hard to oppose America and our efforts in the region, and of course Israel. I think there's 4 specific things we can do. I think we need to increase diplomatic efforts to publicly condemn and coordinate, even with the Gulf Council, a public condemnation of what Iran is trying to do. I think we need to have greater intelligence sharing, both classified intelligence, but also I think we should release some unclassified information to educate the world on what Iran is doing. I think the American people don't understand what Iran is trying to do here, and we need to get that information out. I think we need greater military cooperation with Israel. That means greater joint training exercises. Again, I talked about the increased sales of defensive countermeasures. And then we need to cut off the cash to all of the Iranian proxies that are out there through increased sanctions, the sanction regime. You know, the illegitimate Hezbollah. Also, you've got the Quds forces. All of these groups. Cut off the money, cut off the funding, increase the sanctions.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a model of bipartisanship. 2 women combat veterans, pilots, who show that you can achieve any height when you work together. Thank you very much, Senator McSally, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. That was terrific. Our next guest is chair of the all-important Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he plays a critical role in shaping U.S. foreign policy in Congress. Senator Jim Risch of Idaho has a long track record of working across the aisle to craft and pass legislation that strengthens the U.S.-Israel alliance and ensures that Israel can defend itself by itself. In just a few short months under his leadership, as chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Risch has made his presence known, leading the effort to pass S-1, the bill we just discussed to authorize aid to Israel in combat efforts to delegitimize and isolate Israel around the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage a great friend of the pro-Israel movement, Senator Chairman Jim Risch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to see you. Please have a seat. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being here. You are new in this role as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, obviously a critical committee when it comes to the U.S.-Israel relationship. First, how are you approaching this new role, specifically as it relates to national security and the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Well, you know, over a lifetime, I've really developed a system, if you would, for handling these. I started my career as a county elected official and spent almost 30 years in our state senate, most of it leading it. I was lieutenant governor, and now I've been here for 10 years, and I've been on both the Foreign Relations Committee for 10 years, and I'm the number 2 person on the Intelligence Committee and been there for 10 years. So I'm not a stranger to this stuff. So the way I'm going to approach this, and I've already approached it, is what you do is you go out and assess the battlefield and see what you have, obviously construct a plan and then execute a plan. Pretty simple. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, a lot of times things are out of your hands as far as what you want to do. That is, the system drives you instead of you driving it. So as we go forward into this 21st century, I'm convinced that China is going to be a real challenge for the United States. I think the 21st century, unlike the 19th, but very much like the 18th, 17th, 16th, is going to be a competition between great powers. And China is rising. Russia is not necessarily rising, but very aggressive. And those are going to have to be addressed. Obviously, the Middle East has always been a focus for the United States of America. I intend to keep it that way. As far as other things are concerned, Venezuela has come up just recently, and we're going to have to deal with that. I want to approach this as a bipartisan exercise. It should be. We're all Americans. When it comes to foreign relations, bipartisanship is incredibly important.
And the very first bill that you managed on the floor as chairman included authorization for security assistance to Israel. Why is supporting Israel so important to you?
Well, S1 is obviously a very important bill, and it's got really several different components to it, and they really should all be looked at. But look, we've had a 70-year relationship with Israel, and we have cultivated an indelible bond between the United States and Israel. We closely cooperate in economics, business, scientific research, and innovation, and we also cooperate on many, many governmental operations. Israel has deep shared values with the United States when it comes to beliefs about human dignity, about freedom of worship, freedom of expression, and all the kinds of things that really make up the core of human rights for us. And so S1 was about all of that. It was also about supporting our close friend Jordan and about holding the Assad regime accountable for the acts that have taken place in Syria. And lastly, and finally, we need to mention, very importantly, the elephant, well, in this case, the donkey in the room, and that is the part that dealt with BDS legislation. BDS is pure, unadulterated racism. There is no place for that in America. The Jewish people have been really discriminated against for centuries. BDS is an attempt by people to continue that. It's wrong, it's un-American, it shouldn't be allowed, and this bill addresses that. And I hope when you descend upon the Hill tomorrow, remind the people on the other side, that bill passed with 73 out of 100 votes in the United States Senate. It's right there, it's on the table. Tell my friends in the House, pick that bill up, pass it, and don't use BDS as an excuse to get out of passing that bill.
And from the strategic perspective, there are those voices who argue that supporting Israel is not in America's interest. You've been a forceful advocate against them. How do you respond?
Well, look, Israel is absolutely critical to the interests of the United States of America in the Middle East. We all know from a geographical standpoint what a dangerous neighborhood that it finds itself in. It is the only democracy in the Middle East. It is our best friend there. And it absolutely is important that we have that relationship with such an important actor in such an important place. We all know what Iran's been doing, combating their behavior is incredibly important, and our partnership with Israel in doing that is most important.
I want to pick up on that point about Iran and the region, given Iran's nefarious influence in Syria and Iraq, in Yemen and Lebanon. We see Iran advancing its missile program. What can and should the United States be doing to address Iran's malign influence in the region?
Well, we've already done something really important. I spent a good share of the 8 years before Trump fighting JCPOA. I was very vocal about it. A lot of us felt strongly about it. When President Trump became president, I personally lobbied him to get out of the JCPOA, and I couldn't be more proud of our president in doing that. I argue with our European friends all the time. I don't get it, and I tell them I don't get it, why they'd want to hold hands under the table with these despots when they should be joining us to fight the things that Iran is doing, not the least of which is the sponsorship for terrorism. The Europeans have as much of an interest in that as we do. But in any event, we're going to continue to bring our pressure on Iran. Last week, the administration sanctioned an additional 31 individuals and entities involved in the regime's various programs that are unlawful. One of the most underreported things, I think, and that I hear about through various sources, is how bad conditions are on the ground in Iran. Look, America is still the 800-pound gorilla on the face of this planet when it comes to financial matters. Our sanctions are really, really important. They are having a great effect on Iran, and we need to continue those sanctions. We need to continue to prosecute those sanctions. And eventually, that is going to undermine the regime there enough that the Iranian people themselves are going to rise up and do something about what the horrible things that the regime is doing. We ought to support them. The other important thing I think about Iran is the demographics in Iran. I forgot the exact statistics, but there's a tremendous percentage of the population that's under 30 years old, and they have a different view of the world generally than the current regime in Iran. That's one of the lights at the end of the tunnel I really think we'll see.
And one place where Iran has enormous influence is in Syria, obviously on Israel's northern border. We saw the announcement this week from the administration about the Golan Heights, and wanted to get your perspective on that, Chairman, tonight.
Well, look, again, Syria has been a real problem for us, and it dovetails in with the problem that we have with Iran. Iran is causing tremendous difficulty in Syria, and I applaud the President's decision to leave limited ground forces in Syria, and I encourage our European allies to make similar contributions to that. It would be a very, very bad thing if Iran was able to construct an overland road through Syria to connect with Lebanon and with Hezbollah, who we all know is merely a puppet of the Tehran administration.
And Senator, Mr. Chairman, there's a perennial debate in foreign policy about the proper role of the United States. You know, should we be more involved? Should we be less involved? Should we follow our interests? Should we follow our values? Should we be more parochial, more global? How should we work to advance our shared interest at this critical time?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that struck me when I first started 10 years ago on the Foreign Relations Committee is really how big this planet is. It's shrinking, obviously, because of communications and transportation, but virtually every region has some kind of a problem. The United States cannot be the policeman of the world. Having said that, we also have to pick the places where American interests are very important. And when they are important, we need to step up. We need to step up aggressively, and we need to do something about it. And I think that the United States should continue to promote our values, to promote our shared vision for prosperity and for human rights all over the world.
Thank you very much. All Americans are grateful that this man is the new chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Thank you, Chairman Jim Risch.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You know, unless you've been on the ground in Puerto Rico, it's very difficult to understand the gravity and the severity of the impact of Maria, which was really about a year and a half ago. Being raised Jewish in New Mexico, my father being from Santurce, Puerto Rico, one could have never predicted that these worlds would come together like this. But instead, they have come together in a way of service. And I think AIPAC, with this trip, have really taken that down to its very, very essence.
As Latino leaders and Jewish leaders, we came here with AIPAC to Puerto Rico to learn about the work that Israel is doing on the ground in a real, genuine relationship with the Puerto Rican people.
I think there's no greater bond than the human bond. And I think that's the genius of AIPAC, that they value individuals. I'm not Jewish, and yet I can be blessed by those values. The people of Puerto Rico can be blessed by those values. My parents are both Puerto Rican. I have aunties and cousins here, and I have many beautiful memories in this place. Israel was one of the first countries that came to our aid, and we are grateful.
Fortunately, after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, my family was affected for many months. They had no electricity, no running water, something as simple as a phone call. It was very difficult. The agriculture, infrastructure, health, so many aspects of the life of Puerto Ricans were just turned upside down, and Puerto Rico hasn't fully recovered.
Israel came here not long after Maria. We didn't even know what Israel aid was, who they were, where they came from, or nothing. I mean, it says Israel, so it was related to Israel. They showed up to help us out to see what were the needs of the community, and the first thing they brought us was filters. One of the guys, Oren, even took water that was running from the street, poured it through the filters, took it out, and he drank it. So he said, if you do it, we'll drink it too.
Israel is a non-governmental, non-political organization. Our goal is to save lives around the world after disasters. We work wherever we're needed and where the local community is really interested in the tools and the skills that we can provide.
The second Maria struck, we assessed where the needs were. First thing was distribution of medical supplies, food security, and really collaborating with the most vulnerable people in Puerto Rico.
I think what we're seeing here in Puerto Rico is something that's foundational in the Israeli spirit. Not only are they leading on a bunch of innovations around water, around cybersecurity, they also spread that out into the world.
And whether that is Magen David Adom, whether that is Mashav-trained leaders, whether that is Israel at that moment of need in that specific time, Israel shows up.
This is a great example of how different communities can come together to solve the greater good and really just show that alliance building and collaborative solution building is important.
This is what Israel really is. They truly encompass Tikkun Olam. I mean, it's all for the better good of the world. Israel comes to the need of others without anything asked in return.
This AIPAC trip has definitely made my passion for the advocacy for the state of Israel even stronger because it brings more heart into the advocacy, which I think is a core part of our effectiveness.
As Latino leaders and Jewish leaders, to come to Puerto Rico strengthens our ability to go back re-energized and talk about the U.S.-Israel relationship to anybody and everybody who will listen, and particularly with our members of Congress.
This trip was about never forgetting the importance of the human touch. And when you take a deep breath and you look around, you realize it's the Israeli community that's driving this conversation. And that's the importance of the work that AIPAC's doing on a daily basis.
Please welcome participants from AIPAC's service mission to Puerto Rico.
Muchas gracias, AIPAC. Es un orgullo estar reunidos con nuestros hermanos y hermanas, quienes nos acompañaron en la misión servicio de AIPAC en Puerto Rico. Thank you so much, AIPAC. We're so proud to be here with our brothers and sisters who joined us on AIPAC's service mission to Puerto Rico. This mission furthered AIPAC's dedication to building bridges between diverse communities, Israel's commitment to social good, and the power of partnership.
Our shared experiences in Puerto Rico have served as a bond, and Israel's immense global impact is a message that we'll continue to share with our communities, colleagues, and elected officials. As Americans, we are proud of the support that our country continues to show Israel, and grateful for the ongoing help that Israelis demonstrated to the United States during Hurricane Maria and its aftermath.
Friendship, amistad, chavnita, in any language. The bond between the United States and Israel translates into bonds that last. Thank you.
תיאטרון זה מקצוע שבעצם מתעסק ביחסים.
Etty Hillesum was a young woman from Amsterdam. She was an artist at heart who wrote a journal during World War II. Even though her life is becoming so miserable, she sees beauty in these really small things, and especially in human beings. I really searched for a way to commemorate her. Let's do something in her image. The Etty Hillesum Youth Theater is kind of unique because it's located in a very disadvantaged neighborhood in Jaffa, south of Jaffa, Yafo Daled. A theater for youth at risk, uniting all the population that reminds us of what Israel is.
זה נותן להם איזה מקום של בית, שהכותרת שלו היא תיאטרון, נכון? אבל בעצם זה בית.
אצלנו באנסמבל יש כל מיני דתות. סתם דוגמה, אני ערבי נוצרי. יש אנשים שבאים מבית יהודי, מבית רוסי, ואפילו שהם כל אחד מבית שונה, אנחנו עדיין נהיה חברים ומשפחה.
נשארתי בתיאטרון, ברחתי מכל מקום אחר. לא סיימתי בית ספר, לא שום דבר. עבודה, תיאטרון. נכנסתי לפה בכיתה ח', פה באמת קיבלו אותי כמו שאני. כל מי שהגיע לפה סבל ממשהו. זאתי שהיא רזה מדי, זה שהוא שמן מדי, ההוא שבדיוק עלה לארץ לפני 3 שנים לא ידע עברית טוב. זה המקום שבו אומרים לא משנה כמה אתה שונה, אנחנו יודעים מה אתה עובר.
אוהבת או לא אוהבת?
אתה עושה לי רע, משפיל אותי, נועל אותי בבית של עצמי. מי שלא אוהב כאן זה אתה.
שחקן עושה פעולות מבינים. מי שבחר את החומרים זה הילדים. ועשינו מלא אימפרוביזציות על הדברים, ומתוך זה הם עשו את הכתיבה. עברו פה תהליך ארוך.
התחלנו כל אחד להביא מהמציאות או מהדמיון קצת דברים, והעלינו את זה. וזה יצא משהו טוב.
האווירה היא כבר אווירה אחרת לקראת הצגה. שם בא הקהל לראות, שם את מרגיש את האנרגיות. זה לא חזרות, זה הרגעי קסם האלה של התיאטרון. יכול להיות שיהיו כל מיני התרגשויות, אבל עכשיו צריך לתת בראש. אוקיי, בוא נעשה בהצלחה.
אנסמבל יפו!
אתה עולה לבמה, אתה מסתכל על הקהל.
הבמה זה המקום שלך להראות את מי שאתה.
Before I started it, people always told me, you're a dreamer. There is no such world, the world you imagine. And I knew that if you create a bubble in your image, Etty Hillesum's image, I knew it could work even in the hardest neighborhoods.
אין לנו יותר כסף.
And this is the thing that makes me proud. Jews, Arab immigrants coming here, not finding about anything but speaking about Shakespeare.
שאתה עומד מולם והם מוחאים לך כפיים והם רוצים עוד, זה מעורר בך הרגשה טובה, שנתת להם משהו טוב פה. זה לא מה שאנחנו מקבלים, זה אנחנו גם נותנים לסביבה.
אתמול בכיתי מאושר, פעם ראשונה. כי פשוט מצאתי את עצמי בסביבה הכי נוחה לי, ואמרתי לעצמי, תמיד יש פעם ראשונה לחברות אמיתית. תמיד יש פעם ראשונה למקום שיקבל אותך.
Ladies and gentlemen, founder of the Etty Hillesum Youth Theater, Gal Hurwitz. Please welcome United States Secretary of State, Michael Pompeo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It is truly wonderful to be here tonight. I want to thank AIPAC President Mort Friedman, Board Chair Leland Pickus, and your CEO, Howard Core, for inviting me to be a speaker here tonight. And thanks to you for that incredibly warm welcome. As some of you may have seen, my wife, Susan, who's here with me tonight, and I just returned from a trip to Israel. And we made a little news. You know, I've been to Israel many times, but it was the first time I had the privilege to visit our new embassy in the eternal capital of the Jewish people and the Jewish state in Jerusalem. Thank you. It was incredibly moving to be there. I also became the first American Secretary of State to visit the Western Wall, and the first high-ranking American official to do that with an Israeli Prime Minister. I then traveled to Beirut to speak with the Lebanese leadership about a big problem. The Iranian-backed threat of Hezbollah, the threat to Lebanon and to Israel, and we minced no words. And of course, it was a great honor to be on Israeli soil and to celebrate with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the very moment President Trump boldly recognized the Golan Heights for what it is, a part of Israel. As most of you would have seen by now, just a short while ago, President Trump, alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu, signed a decree affirming Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. What a truly great 2 days for two great nations. You know, that recognition ties in with my own personal connection to Israel, and more importantly, to America's connection with Israel. As a former West Point cadet and a former tank officer, I've had a chance, all right, for all you tank officers in the Army in the audience, I had a chance both while I was on active duty and while I was a student to study the great and historic tank battles that took place on those very heights. And it was really lucky for my family. On my first visit, I took them to the Golan Heights, and I had my son stand in each of the positions so we could feel exactly what it looked like to those soldiers on that day. My son reminds me it was muddy and wet, and his clothes were dirty, but he'll never forget the walkabout that we all took on the Golan Heights. You know, I mentioned this in my press conference that night with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that Susan, Nick, and I had a chance to gaze out of the Golan into the Valley of Tears, named for the vicious fighting that took place there in 1973. We saw what those brave Israeli soldiers would have seen. On the morning of October 9th, Commander Avigdor Kaulani and the 7th Tank Brigade had been fighting for 3 days. They were totally exhausted. They were totally outnumbered. They didn't know what would happen next. Syrian tanks were indeed on the cusp of breaking through their lines, yet they held on. Just when it looked like all was lost, a miracle took place. Tanks, reinforcements swooped in, and the Syrians retreated. As the dust settled, the voice of General Kalani crackled through the radio. You have saved the people of Israel. How can you not be completely awed by these brave men, their defense of the Golan Heights, and their commitment to the country? And how can we also not be proud here in America, proud to know that their relentless defense of Israel, of Zion, was aided by the United States of America? In Israel's hour of need, in support of these great battles, America launched Operation Nickel Glass. It provided Israel with tanks, with artillery, with munitions, and all the other supplies that were needed to continue the defense of the homeland. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir later said, "For generations, all will be told of the miracle of the immense planes from the United States bringing the material that brought life to our people." Without that battle at the Valley of Tears, and without the American support of Israel, there would not have been an Israel to recognize as the proper sovereign over the Golan Heights. And this relationship, from Truman to Trump, is a tradition of supporting Israel deeply. And I think about that every day as I serve as America's Secretary of State. But I want to talk to you tonight about something that I'm very worried about. Indeed, I am deeply worried about an old threat that is reemerging to Israel and Jews all around the world, the threat of anti-Semitism. It's a cancer metastasizing in the Middle East, in Europe, and indeed, sadly, here in the United States as well. In Britain, the Labour Party's tolerance of anti-Semitism in its ranks is a national disgrace. And France's Jews are under attack. The incidence of anti-Semitic attacks in Germany is also on the rise. Indeed, hate crimes against Jews in this country have risen by 1/3 since 2017. We don't have to go far but to consider attacks on the Orthodox Jewish community in Crown Heights, Brooklyn over this past year. And none of us will ever forget the 11 Americans murdered while praying one Shabbat morning at the Tree of Life Synagogue. May their memories be a blessing to all of us. Every decent human being has the responsibility to fight anti-Semitism. It's an affront to religious liberty. It denies the rights of Jews to worship their God. It attacks what it means to be Jewish, ethnically and religiously. But Americans have a special responsibility to combat this scourge because religious freedom sits at the core of our founding. It's in our Bill of Rights. As the very first freedom, it's the essential freedom upon which all others that we enjoy here in America are built. And it's because I'm a champion of that religious freedom and because I'm an American that I'm here today to tell you the United States stands with the Jewish people and Israel in the fight against the world's oldest bigotry. This bigotry is taking on an insidious new form in the guise of anti-Zionism. It's infested college campuses in the form of the boycott, defest, and sanction movement. It's discussed in our media. It's supported by certain members of Congress, I suspect none of whom are here tonight. Now don't get me wrong. Criticizing Israel's policies is an acceptable thing to do in a democracy. It's what we do. But criticizing the very right to exist of Israel is not acceptable. Anti-Zionism denies the very legitimacy of the Israeli state and of the Jewish people. Zionism reflects the determination of the Jews to live as free people in their ancestral homeland. It grows out of the Jewish faith. You know, Zionism was born in the Old Testament, crystallized under Theodor Herzl in the 19th century, and was realized in May of 1948, when David Ben-Gurion read aloud a Declaration of Independence proclaiming the establishment of the modern state of Israel. And yet today, only one country at the 192 United Nations has its right to exist routinely questioned. So friends, let me go on record. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The Trump administration opposes it unequivocally, and we will fight for it relentlessly. I want to talk about why anti-Semitism is on the rise. I have a few thoughts on the reasons. First, Western civilizations, and our youth in particular, are losing firsthand experience with the Holocaust and its survivors as the post-war generation dies out. I saw that clearly and thought about it on my most recent trip to Israel when I visited Yad Vashem. Second, professors teach our children that Israel is the epitome of imperialism. Third, journalists who help drive our public debate don't always take the time to consider facts or think critically, and I'm being polite. But frankly, worst of all, some politicians think anti-Semitism can actually win them votes. And we have to correct the record. We all have an obligation to do so, because Israel should be admired, not attacked, embraced, not vilified, and emulated, not ostracized. President Trump has made the fight against anti-Semitism a top priority. You can see it in our actions. In June, we left the fever swamp of the UN Human Rights Council, which since its creation has adopted more resolutions condemning Israel than all other nations combined. At the State Department, I reinvigorated the position of Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, and we have a real fighter in that role, Ilan Carr, who I'm so proud to have on our team. Last year, it was my honor to host the first ever Religious Freedom Ministerial at the State Department. I'm proud to say we will do it again in July. On March 15th, just a few days past, I took action to deter the lawless International Criminal Court from targeting Americans and Israelis alike. And the Trump administration and my team at the State Department is confronting the world's #1 proponent of anti-Semitism, the Islamic Republic of Iran. You've seen it, not just in promises the president made in our actions. We pulled out of the incurably flawed Iran nuclear deal, which put more than $100 billion in the pockets of the Ayatollah and funded the Islamic Republic's violent quest for regional domination. In its place, we've enacted the strongest pressure campaign in history against Iran and its proxies, and they are feeling the pain. As I said a bit earlier, I was in Beirut less than 48 hours ago. There, Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's terrorist-in-chief, recently begged for contributions from the very people in Lebanon that he and his Iranian masters have subjugated and terrorized. Hassan Nasrallah passing the tin cup is good news. Meanwhile, we're supporting Israel's right to defend itself with current 10-year military support to the tune of $38 billion a year, and more importantly, with the moral clarity that Israel deserves and demands. The list is long. Just a few weeks ago, we deployed one of our most advanced anti-missile systems in Israel. And you've seen the work of Mr. Kushner and Mr. Greenblatt and our team hard at working, devising a proposal to help Israelis and Palestinians find a just and lasting peace. Importantly, too, my team is working to mobilize and rally nations all across the Middle East to find common ground. In February, our Polish friends partnered with the State Department for a conference in Warsaw. Over 60 foreign ministers attended, and Arab leaders from all around the world sat with Israel's leaders. It was truly historic. But uniquely, frankly, in spite of its historic nature, it didn't feel historic. It simply felt right. Jews, Muslims, Christians working together to defeat Islamist terrorists, defeat the vociferous anti-Semites in Iran, and protect each of our nations was the right thing to do for each of those countries. We live in dangerous times. We have to speak the truth. Anti-Semitism should and must be rejected by all decent people. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and any nation that espouses anti-Zionism, like Iran, must be confronted. We must defend the rightful homeland of the Jewish people. We must see to it that the old dreams of Moses, of Herzl, of America's poet laureate, Emma Lazarus, who wrote the verses inscribed on our Statue of Liberty, never fades. Indeed, we're reminded of the consequences if we fall silent. As I close, I want to return to my visit to Yad Vashem. At that memorial, those of you who have been there know, there is a list of people called the righteous among the nations. These are non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. 40 years ago this year, a man named Tibor Boronsky was added to the list. Tibor repeatedly risked life and limb to save 3,000 Jews in Hungary during World War II. He later immigrated to America and became a citizen. He passed away this January at the age of 96. In the course of his heroic labors, a Nazi officer held a gun to Tibor's head and said the following: "Why do you, a Christian, help Jews?" Tibor answered, "You are either silly or an idiot. It is because I am Christian that I help the Jews." Know with confidence that the Trump administration will not grow weary of the fight. To abandon it would mean to abandon our principles. And as Secretary of State and as a Christian, I'm proud to lead American diplomacy to support Israel's right to defend itself. And I am proud to stand with the Jewish people and to champion the cause of religious liberty in Israel and in America. These are special times, amazing times, and I want to thank each of you, and may God bless each of you, Israel, and the United States of America. Thank you.
Please welcome author and journalist Ebony Williams.
Our next guest is a longtime leader on Capitol Hill and the top-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. Throughout his long career in Congress, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy has been an outspoken advocate for pro-Israel legislation, as well as a driving force behind the scenes to make sure that bills are passed that promote the safety and security of both America and Israel. For years, he's been a senior member on the trips that Israel takes many freshman congressmen and women that's sponsored by AIEF. That's the educational component of AIPAC. It encourages members of the House to see Israel up close, firsthand, while they can understand the challenges and threats facing the state of Israel, both Republican and Democrat. He joins us tonight to discuss Congress's work to further strengthen the relationship between America and Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming to the stage our honored guest, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Leader McCarthy, you and the entire Congress has been consistent in their support of Israel's right to defend herself. However, tragically, this morning we all heard of the attack coming from Gaza, from Hamas. It was actually the third rocket towards Tel Aviv in only 2 weeks. What's your message for the caucus today and our audience here tonight?
We will always stand with Israel first and foremost, so everybody understands that very clearly. But my first message is to the audience is thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your support. AIPAC should never be boycotted. AIPAC should always be celebrated. I know in this audience we'll have different political views. We'll come from different places. But there is a bond that unites us. The bond between Israel and America. You know, Ronald Reagan, I want to paraphrase what he said one time. He said, I know your organization doesn't rate members, it doesn't endorse, but I endorse you for what you do. And at no other time do I believe it's more important than now. We should not take for granted that this bond and that everybody understands why a Jewish state should exist and needs to exist. I watched what happens in the region. Hezbollah's work with Iran, building 20 times the amount of missiles. We just talked today of what's coming from Gaza. Or over on Syria, with the work with Iran trying to put a permanent base, and their look to try to take Golan Heights. In the 70 years, now is our time to speak, now is our time to stand, and not back up, but lean in. Our friend Mike Pompeo spoke. The scariest part that I've heard recently is the rise of anti-Semitism. He spoke of the Labour Party of Britain that used to be one of the strongholds for Israel, but now talks about Hamas and Hezbollah being friends and speaks openly of anti-Semitism. We look at the horrific action of what took place in Pittsburgh just in October. But when I heard language spoken in the own floors of Congress, I want you to know we did not stand silent. We moved a resolution, even as the minority party. I will make you this one promise. We will never let it stand, we'll never let it grow, and we'll try to crush it any place we see it, and we thank you for that.
Leader McCarthy, you alluded to it just now in your comments, that even amongst us in this room, coming from different political opinions, we might not all agree. Now, it would be a myth, we'd all be kidding ourselves to act as if historically Republicans and Democrats got along perfectly, right? But it does seem that in this moment, across the country, it's particularly difficult for the partisanship to subside. Is there, and you have been a longtime leader in the Republican Party, let me say that. So is there maybe a part of the bipartisanship that is occurring that maybe we just don't see? Certainly, I think many of us are hoping that a lot of this is hyperbole. Give us a little insight on what the relationship is within the House of Representatives and in Congress, and also how you make efforts as such a strong leader in the Republican Party to get things done with your Democrat colleagues.
The day I became leader, I went to Steny Hoyer. And I said, we both lead the tour to Israel. Since I've taken 148 members to Israel.
Amazing.
And of the Republican freshman class, 3/4 have already pledged to go this August. And we're going to get them all there. But I went to Steny and said, Democrats go 1 week, Republicans go 1 week. I know it's difficult to make us all go at the same time, but let's change it and overlap for a couple days. And that's what we do now. We overlap for a couple days. We may be of different parties, but Steny Hoyer and I work very great when it comes to Israel. Our staffs meet together, we work together, we travel to Israel together. We have a friendship and we have a bond that I believe we both understand. But I'd be lying to you if I said that it's bipartisan in this Congress. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed of the last resolution that had to be watered down. I was embarrassed that they split it. And let's not make excuses for what language people use and say they don't understand. That will get us into a mistake. That will put us into problems. And I will be as bipartisan as the next person when it comes to Israel, but I will not, it's not partisan when I stand up for Israel, because I stand up for the love and the bond that this country has and the understanding of the democracy, the liberty. We have a common bond. We also have common enemies. But we should never let that split us in Congress, and that wise we should not let the parties determine when we stand up or where we should stand up. We have been bipartisan before, and we should come back to it.
A follow-up on that, leader. Earlier in this session, actually, we were able to bear witness to a coalition, a small one, but we saw several freshmen, congressmen and women, representative of both parties. Tell me what that felt like for you to see that. Does that give us some optimism in even this Congress that that type of work can still be done?
It gives us optimism, but let's not have false hope. I have never heard of an organization that wanted to boycott us here. I have never seen the language used that I heard just this past month. And I've never seen that we had to question to water something down.
Are those outliers, though, leader? What do you think?
There's outliers if we stand up, but let's not get a foothold of all the bipartisanship, all the unison that we had before, all the times we spoke with one voice. And I believe we can keep it that way. But if you stay silent, it won't. We have seen history, this happen before. But we also see it being strong, that we could come back together. And that's why I do have optimism.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to look now to Israel's northern border. When you visited Lebanon and Syrian border, what did you see just from being there, taking it in, that needs to be done to make sure that Israel stays safe, particularly in that part of the region?
You know, this is why it's so important for members to see firsthand. When we go to Golan Heights and you sit there, you know, it always said a picture speaks 1,000 words. You do not have to point out where the border is, because you could tell the border from the green farms into the vast desert on the other side. Yes. You can tell what someone does with their land and someone does not. The last time we were just there, you would hear the gunfire on the other side within Syria. But being there, you understand. Everyone understands the power of having the high ground. We can never give the high ground up. The world is safer because Israel has Golan Heights. The community is safer, and it's more prosperous because of it. And I'm proud of our president standing there today with the Prime Minister. You cannot have peace without Israel in charge of the Golan Heights. Simple.
Speaker McCarthy, Leader McCarthy, rather.
No, you can say
I can say that.
I can hope.
Absolutely. Let's talk about BDS.
Yes.
Obviously, an attempt to delegitimize Israel. I want you to tell us all what you would say to BDS advocates that in some way think they're doing something good, but instead are exactly that, undermining and delegitimizing Israel and really enhancing the danger in the region.
It is appalling to what they are saying, of trying to equate Israel with something they are not, equating it, saying it's Nazi or other elements that are just so untruth. It's not about coexistence. It's about coercion. It's the very worst element that we see. And we cannot let this get a stronghold. And the fear I have is when I go on college campuses, when people don't understand what they're even saying. That's why we should speak with one voice. That's why I'm proud of what the Senate passed. I'm proud of what Lee Zeldin co-sponsored. But this is when you're walking the halls, is what you have to express. This is what we need to pass. This is where we have to make our stand. Look, I like Ronald Reagan. There's one thing that Ronald Reagan said too. You like it too. I don't know why you're so far right. You are always one generation away from losing your democracy and freedom. One generation away. And if we allow this spoken on the colleges, people become older and they think it's acceptable. They believe the lies. This is why we should speak very strongly in Congress. And I will tell you, on this side of the aisle, you'll have 100% vote standing up against BDS and standing up for the truth.
As they stand up. As they stand up. As they stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the top Republican in Congress, Leader Kevin McCarthy. Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Thank you.
When I was 24 years old, I woke up one morning, and 2 hours later, I was completely paralyzed from the chest down. The doctors realized I suffered a rare condition they called spinal stroke. Small blood vessel just exploded in my spine and left me paralyzed from the chest down. I was an athlete, and suddenly my body is different, my life is different.
שומעים פיצוץ מאוד גדול, מעריכים שזה מטען. אני מתחיל לאבד המון דם, מתחיל לאבד את ההכרה. זה היה קליע. קליע של קלט שנכנס לי בצד הברך והוא לוקח ממש את כל המפרק.
For me to discover basketball again on wheels with the wheelchair was like falling in love again with my first love. It was just romantic.
בית הלוחם זה נשמע כמו בית של הלוחם, שהאדם שלחם במלחמה. לא. זה בית בהגדרה שלי שהוא לוחם את המלחמה הפנימית שלו. לחיות בשלום עם החיים שלו החדשים. זה לא בריכה, וזה לא אולם כדורסל רק, וזה לא מגרשי טניס.
זה בית. כמו שאתה נכנס לבית שלך, וזה מקום בטוח כזה, שאתה מרגיש בו הכי פתוח במקומות הכי רגישים שלך. גם כשאתה נכנס לבית הלוחם, הפציעה היא הופכת להיות מאוד, אני אגיד את זה, מאוד לא מיוחדת. אני לא חושב שאני הולך להיות שחקן כדורסל, זה לא כמה שקסם לי, אבל עצם זה שאתה יוצא רגע מהבית, מגיע לזה מסגרת יותר בריאה, עם חבר'ה, קבוצה, יוצאים, משתפים, משחקים, נהנים, פורקים,
זה מייצר אצלך איזושהי תנועה שהיא בריאה. שאתה יוצא משם ואתה אומר, אוקיי, עשיתי משהו, תתקדם.
When I came to Bet Halochem, they made it really clear for me that I have to make basketball my profession again. I didn't know if I want to do it. If I cannot do it like I did it before, I don't want to do it at all. That was my first thought about going back to play basketball. But in basketball, we say that you always miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And for me, I had to take the shots. Here, we have the opportunity to do it, to be whatever we can be.
יש איזשהו צומת שאתה מגיע אליה, שאתה אומר, אוקיי, אני לא יכול להתעסק במה אם ואם היה קורה, אני צריך להתחיל להתעסק במה אני יכול לעשות. אני יכול לעשות מלא דברים. הרבה יותר קל לסחוב את האלונקה מאשר להיות על האלונקה. אז הרבה פעמים גם יותר קל לך שאתה תומך במישהו אחר, אז אתה כבר מרגיש שזה, אתה מרגיש אחרת, אתה לא מרוכז בך.
It's a long process. It doesn't happen immediately. But at the end of the road, you feel like you just turned your disability to an ability. When you come here, you see a future. You see that you can be whatever you want to be. Excuse me, but I have to go back. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, Moran Samuel and Noam Dadon. Please welcome back to the stage, Jeremy Bash.
Our next guest is a longtime friend of the pro-Israel movement, Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Senator Sinema has been an outspoken supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship as she has risen through the Arizona state legislature and onto the United States House of Representatives. While serving in the House, she took a strong stance on confronting Iran's aggression in the Middle East, and she voted against the Iran nuclear deal. She joins us today as a new member of the United States Senate, where she serves on the Homeland Security Committee. And earlier this year, she demonstrated her continued commitment to the U.S.-Israel alliance by voting in favor of S1, the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Great to see you. Thank you so much. You take that chair. We are so thrilled to have you with us tonight, and we want to start with a very simple question. Why is the U.S.-Israel relationship important to you?
Well, I think certainly for the Arizonans in the room, they will already know this answer. But for those who I haven't had an opportunity to meet, I think what I would first start by saying is my own experience. You know, I was really privileged years ago to travel to Israel and see firsthand what the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship means on the ground to people living in Israel every single day. And I often tell my colleagues that while the relationship is important, because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and our greatest partner, the relationship is particularly important because it's critical to the long-term national security of the United States. It matters to us that we keep this relationship close. It matters to our country and our future. And it serves as a beacon and an example to countries all over the world of what democracy, partnership, and alliance for freedom can look like.
As we were talking, I was telling you that my family in central Israel spent their morning in a bomb shelter They were hearing the sirens, hearing the explosions of the rockets fired from Gaza this morning. I know you've traveled to Israel and visited with some of the affected communities.
I have, and in fact, when I traveled to Israel for my second visit ever, which was in the summer of 2013, we visited with communities that lived very close to the Gaza border, a beautiful community. And we visited a playground, and it really hit me that there were bomb shelters on a playground at an elementary school designed for children ages 5 through 8. And in my first career, I was a social worker, and I worked in elementary school, helping kids and families deal with life and difficulties and challenges. And I reflected at that moment that while I was focused on helping kids and families in their difficult lives, all the years that I worked in Sunny Slope, Phoenix, Arizona, never once did I have to think about a bomb shelter. Never once did I have to think about the immediate physical safety of the children that I was working with. And every time I travel to Israel and see the danger that communities live in, it reminds me how important it is that we as members of Congress and senators do our part in protecting Israel, ensuring that she has what she needs to defend herself from these horrific types of activities like we saw this morning.
Now, you and I first met at an AIPAC event in Arizona a couple years back. You know how important it is at AIPAC to educate candidates who are running for Congress, running for office, because the minute they are sworn in, they may have a vote to take that impacts Israel. And your first vote in the Senate was actually the motion to proceed on the bill S1, the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act. You voted yes when many of your colleagues did not, and we want to know why.
So this was, I don't want anyone to get too bored with all the boring political stuff, but much of what happens in Washington today is the result of a broken and dysfunctional system. And so issues that should be what I call no-brainers, bipartisan, where we all work together and agree with each other, often get tangled up in a partisan morass. And that is exactly what happened when I first got to the United States Senate. You all will recall we were in the midst of a ridiculous, wasteful government shutdown. And there was an attempt, yeah, it was ridiculous. And there was an attempt to politicize the United States' support for Israel and her defense systems. And I was unwilling to allow that politicization to happen. I'm not going to do it. So I chose to vote yes on the legislation because I believe in the legislation. That's it. I believe in it. But I do think what we've seen, in particular in this session of Congress, with this extreme kind of escalation of the partisanship and politicization, is that this votes, such as that first vote we took for the first entire week of the Senate, and votes that we will continue to take, provide an opportunity for those of us who are committed to the U.S.-Israel relationship to push the partisanship aside, focus on the issue, and recommit to the shared relationship that the U.S. and Israel have, and to remind our colleagues and teach others how important this relationship is for national security.
Now, in 2015, you were one of 24 House Democratic members to vote against the Iran nuclear deal. As you look at Iran now, what are your thoughts about how the United States should move forward on our Iran policy?
Well, I could talk for a long time about why I voted no on the Iran deal, but I think I spoke with half of the people in this room personally about it. So for me, that was a very important decision. And during my service in the House, that was one of the most important votes I cast. And I believe that I made the right vote. I will tell you this, a friend of mine came to me about a year later, and he said to me, Kirsten, I just want you to feel better about your vote on the Iran deal, because we've looked at it, and it turns out that that's actually the issue that is hurting me the most in my district. This is someone who voted the other direction. And I smiled and said, I don't need to feel better about it. I always felt good about it. Like it was the right vote.
You're good.
I'm good. But the reasons I voted no on the deal are the same reasons that I'm concerned about where we are right now. Iran is growing as a global superpower. And unfortunately, as a result of the deal, has gained access to cash, to increasing access to global capital, and to normalized relationships with other countries, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe as well. So Iran is gaining access to weapons, and Iran, equally importantly, is gaining access to political and financial capital in the world, which means that in 5, 10, or more years, the threat of an Iran without very strict controls around it becomes that much more amplified. And I think that it's our duty now to reach out to our partners in Europe as well as other parts of the world to make sure that everyone sees the growing threat from Iran and that we work together in a coordinated fashion to push back and replace those controls around Iran. You know, I remember when we were going through the debate around that legislation, one of my colleagues said to me, well, this is 10 years. 10 years is a long time. And in American politics, 10 years is a long time. But in a country like Iran, without democratic elections, 10 years is a blink of an eye. They can just hold on until those 10 years end, and during that time, amass control and become more and more dangerous. It's our job to work together in a coordinated fashion to make sure they don't have the ability to do that.
And so one of the issues that you've worked on during your time in the House and now in the Senate was countering terror financing. And as you've spoken about, because I've heard you, Iran can finance Hamas, it can finance Hezbollah, even Al-Qaeda. How can we do more to crack down on that cash flow?
I'm so glad you brought that up because they are actually the main source of financing for terrorism in the world. They're not the only source, but they are certainly one of the largest sources. We've passed legislation in a bipartisan way that has been signed into law by President Trump that has helped make a difference. So right now, federal agencies are required to do an annual report where they actually talk about how they're dealing with counterterrorism financing, how they're using controls and working together across agencies to better track this financing and to crack down on the financing outside of the U.S. through banking and non-banking measures. But we're working on new legislation that actually helps the agencies become more modern. One of the, I know, surprising, the federal government is not quite modern. So one of the things we really have to do is help these agencies catch up, become more modern so that we can track these transactions as they happen in real time and interdict them before they make it to their end result, which of course is in the hands of terrorists. So that legislation I think you'll see moving later this year. It's going to be bipartisan. We expect it to pass. We expect President Trump to support it. And it gives our government more tools to not just stop these transactions, but track them as they're beginning to happen so they don't get completed.
And finally tonight, an issue that I think is on everybody's mind, which is the increasing polarization in our politics. And you've really made it a point to reach across the political aisle to get things done on this issue and many issues. Why is bipartisanship important to you, and do you feel there's a way to push back against that heightened polarization?
I'm so glad you've asked this question, though if you'd asked it at the beginning, we would never have made it to the other questions, because I could talk about this all night. I firmly believe that the country needs bipartisanship to solve the challenges that we face. The problems we have domestically as well as internationally are too great to be handled by one party being in control or trying to play gotcha or getcha with the other party, which is so much of what we see today. We have to rise above that. We have to. We cannot afford the petty politics of the past. And so I remain firmly committed to engaging in bipartisan action in everything that I do, whether it's standing strong for the U.S.-Israel relationship or, frankly, any other issue I work on, because that is what America deserves. It is what our forefathers did to create the country that we enjoy today, and it is what we owe to our kids and our grandkids so that they can have a country that they can also enjoy and be proud of tomorrow. It is our duty.
Arizona is fortunate. America is fortunate. Senator Kyrsten Sinema, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was amazing.
I grew up my whole life as a Zionist. My father was a Zionist when he was still a child in Budapest, Hungary. So I've known of Israel, and my love for Israel has been imbibed with mother's milk. When I was 22, I got married the day before my 22nd birthday. We had a child 11 months later. And I think that process of starting to build a home in this country began to sensitize me to what we have as our homeland in Israel. As a child of survivors, knowing that we didn't have a voice in Congress at the most critical time, perhaps of all of Jewish history, only underlies how important the relationship that the Jewish community has with Congress today through AIPAC. We don't know what the future brings. We have no idea what's coming. And that we know we have a voice, a unified voice, a strong voice, representing the needs of our community, representing the needs of the state of Israel and the connection between these two countries. And knowing that we're now laying the seeds, laying the foundation for relationships that could prevent something like that ever happening again. I can't think of anything more important.
Please welcome Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer.
Hello, everybody. Hello, AIPAC. 18,000 strong. Well, it's great to be here among friends. I want to thank your great leadership, Mort Friedman and Howard Core, Esther Kurtz, Lillian Pincus, and of course, my fellow New Yorker, Bob Cohen. They sweat blood and tears for Israel every day. Thank God we have them here. And I want to thank all of you for being here and caring. Now, to start, I'd like to talk a little bit about my family. I know so many of you for so long, you're like family to me. Now, this year has been filled with several simchas for the Schumer family. About a year ago, my younger daughter Allison told us she and her partner had set a wedding date, November 18th. We were thrilled. And then, just a few weeks later, my older daughter Jessica told us she was pregnant with our first grandchild. The due date, November 18th. We prayed that the baby would be early or late. And God listened to our prayers because a very pregnant Jessica joined our family for a beautiful wedding in Brooklyn, and a few days later, Noah Melvin Schumer Shapiro was born. He turned 4 yesterday. He smiles. He turned over. He's already a genius. He's an Einstein. Anyway, and now a little about my dad and my parents. God willing, they're Noah's great-grandparents. God willing, on Flag Day, June 14th, my dad will turn 96. God willing, on D-Day, June 6th, my mom will turn 91. And in 2 weeks, God willing, we will celebrate with their new great-grandchild their 70th anniversary together. And you know, my family, it's just a great part of the American dream. My father was an exterminator. He struggled his whole life. My sister once sent him a Father's Day card that said, "Dad, we're the only family that associates the smell of DDT with love," because he came home from work smelling of all the chemicals. But listen, the DDT didn't do him too bad. He's going to be 96. Now, seriously, only in America could an exterminator's son grow up to be the first Jewish leader in the Senate of the United States of America. So, my friends, as I reflect on my growing family, I can't help but think of what kind of society we're going to leave to the next generation and the generation after that. Tonight, I wish to speak personally about my support for Israel, the need to maintain a strong bipartisan relationship, and the threats, the very real threats, that Jewish communities across the globe are facing. The security of Israel is and has always been in America's national interest. But I fear too many of our younger generation don't have the same understanding of the threats facing Israel as my generation did. They don't know that as long as Israel has existed, she has had to defend herself from enemies who seek to wipe her off the map. That's a fundamental problem we must confront head-on. Now, that's certainly not true here at AIPAC. Our young people know the story and the importance of Israel, and I know that there are several thousand students here. Tonight, students, stand up. Let us applaud you for being here and helping the cause of Israel. We need you and love you. But we know that this problem of ignorance about Israel's difficult history still persists at too large a scale, particularly among young people. And so it's incumbent on us to explain that history to every single member of the younger generation, Jew and non-Jew alike. We must remind them, teach them, that threats to Israel are not just in the past, but very much in the present and the future. My friends, when I think of my grandson Noah, who was born at a time when Israel is stronger than ever, I think about what I'll tell him when he's old enough to understand. I'll tell Noah that as a young man in James Madison High School, I remember walking to class with a transistor radio to my ear. Of course, I'll have to explain to him what a transistor radio is. Listening to the news reports that June about the Six-Day War, praying to Hashem that Israel wouldn't be washed into the sea. I'll tell Noah that there was a great and articulate Israeli ambassador to the UN, Abba Eban, who bravely came to lecture at my college while the SDS-PLP was waging a campaign against, quote, Zionist imperialists, saying Israel had no right to exist. And how, when the SDS-PLP tried to shout him down, Abba Eban, in his beautiful Etonian tones, said, "You," when he pointed to them in the balcony. "You certainly cheer when anyone else gets a state, but you do not cheer when the Jewish people achieve their dream of a homeland." And the anti-Zionists slinked out in shame. I'll tell Noah that as an adult, I watched my grandfather, Noah's great-grandfather, one of the few in his larger family to survive the Holocaust because he was lucky enough to come to America, become overwhelmed by emotion and break down in tears when he saw Eretz Yisrael for the first time. And I'll tell Noah, just like many of you will tell your children and grandchildren over Pesach, that this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. In every generation, they have tried to afflict us. Now, of course, being Jews, we've even found levity in that painful history by summarizing all Jewish holidays with 3 short sentences. This is how they summarize we summarize our holidays. They tried to kill us, We survived. Let's eat. Thank God, my friends, we live in America, where our people have had every opportunity to survive and thrive. And thank God that after 2 millennia of wandering the desert, the Jewish people were finally able to return to the land of milk and honey, Eretz V'Cholov U'Davash, where they can live in freedom and raise families in relative peace. There's no question the Jewish people have come a long way in the past 70 years, but I still feel a great deal of anxiety, as I know all of you do in this room, looking at a world today where threats to the Jewish people in the land of Israel are growing and have been for some time. So we must remind all young people that Hezbollah still can and wants to send rockets into Israel, bringing death and destruction to civilians, that Hamas still builds tunnels on Israel's southern border to kidnap and kill, and that the Iranian regime still plots to undermine Israel in every way. Anyone, young or old, who thinks these threats to Israel aren't real should just read today's newspaper. Just this morning, a rocket from Hamas-controlled Gaza struck and destroyed a home north of Tel Aviv in Mishmeret, injuring several people, including 2 infants. Our prayers are with them. Hamas said the rocket this morning was sent, they said, by mistake. They made the same claim 2 weeks ago when 2 rockets were fired at Tel Aviv. And what about the barrage of rockets that Hamas fired into Sderot just a few hours ago? Were those a mistake too? Israel has every right to respond, just as any other nation, including our own, would. Some voices will condemn Israel for responding, but no government can allow its civilians to be subject to rocket attack time and time again. And I stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Israel, condemning those attacks and doing what they must to defend their homeland. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, none of these enemies darkening Israel's door believe that a Jewish state in any form should exist. We must never forget that. And my friends, to do all this, we must keep the U.S.-Israel relationship bipartisan. We can only hope to defend Israel, yes, bipartisan, both parties side by side. We can only help to defend Israel from these threats so long as we maintain a united front, Democrats and Republicans together. This has been a mission for me. I'm proud that the overwhelming majority of Democrats are pro-Israel and have always been. Let me give you some examples. Just from this past Congress, because Democrats in the Senate strongly support Israel. Democrats overwhelmingly, almost to a person, supported the Memorandum of Understanding, enshrining American military and security assistance to Israel for years to come. We're reminded of the importance of that support whenever rockets are indiscriminately fired at civilians. The Iron Dome system that helps shoot those missiles out of the sky exists in part due to the long-standing bipartisan support of Congress. Democrats overwhelmingly supported a mission of mine, the Taylor Force Act, which prevents American dollars from benefiting the Palestinian Authority until they stop payments to those who commit brutal acts of terror. Every single Democrat, every single one of the caucus signed a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations expressing concern about their vicious anti-Israel bias. And Democrats unanimously supported the United States Israel Security Assistance Authorization Act. Now, it happened to be blocked by a Republican senator, but it would be wrong to say he represents the entire Republican Party, and I never will. Not only is it demonstrably false to say Democrats are anti-Israel, it also hurts the Israel-U.S. relationship. Plain and simple. The Democratic Party supports Israel, and we will continue to do so, and we will maintain that bipartisan relationship through thick and thin. Israel depends on it. So, whenever I led a piece of pro-Israel legislation, even in the days when Democrats had a vast majority, those were the days, I always included a Republican lead sponsor because the foundation of our relationship must remain bipartisan as it has been for decades. And I tell you this, those who seek to use Israel as a means to scoring political points do a disservice to both Israel and the United States. Our politics may be more polarized than ever, but it's incumbent upon all of us who care about U.S.-Israel relationship to keep it bipartisan. We must pledge to one another that we'll keep the polarization of Washington away from poisoning the bipartisan support that Israel has always enjoyed. My friends, we also must continue to stand firm against the BDS movement. I have long opposed the BDS movement publicly, privately, and continuously because its founders and too many of its supporters do not believe the Jewish people have a right to any state in their homeland, whatever its size and boundaries. We must be clear-eyed about the history of this BDS movement. I ask anybody who supports BDS or is considering supporting it, particularly young people who may be of goodwill, to remember the following, and we, us, must make sure they know it. Even before Israel came into existence, boycotts were used as a weapon of those who opposed the very existence of the Jewish state. During the 20s and 30s, Arab leaders organized boycotts of the Jewish community in Palestine, calling for the picketing of Jewish-owned businesses and general strikes that devolved into violence. And as soon as Israel came into existence, the Arab League instituted an official boycott of the fledgling nation, and soon thereafter a boycott of anyone who did business with Israel, and then anyone who did business with anyone who did business with Israel. Some of you my age will remember, in those days we were so proud of Air France. Every other airline boycotted Israel and wouldn't fly there. But only Air France would fly to Israel. All the others were participating in the Arab boycott. We must never go back to the days when major companies boycott Israel as they did in the 50s and 60s. And more than 30 years would pass because the Arab League boycott was broken by Egypt. And still today, there are nations that actively enforce a primary boycott of Israel. BDS must be understood first and foremost as the next chapter of this troubled past. Make no mistake about it. BDS's founders did not believe in any state of Israel, and too many of its leading proponents, not all but too many, want nothing more than for Israel to disappear. Look no further than the words of the movement's founder, Omar Barghouti, who said, quote, "We oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." And he also said, quote, "Jews are not a people." Now, my personal experience has borne this out. Whenever I speak and argue with those who most actively push BDS, I ask them a very simple question. Do you support a Jewish state? All too often, too many, not all, but many too many, will waffle or they'll say no. They do not support a Jewish state. That's not a disagreement over policy. That's not a disagreement over borders. It's a disagreement over Israel's very right to exist, and we must never accept that kind of disagreement. So from the moment Israel drew her first breath until this very moment, Israel has long been threatened by boycott movements. And I will always stand with Israel against those who seek to do her harm by boycott or by any other means. Now, just as we must educate the world about the true origins of the BDS movement, so too are we called on to confront a greater and more ancient threat to the Jewish people: anti-Semitism. That poison, the same poison that chased countless Jewish people from Europe and killed so many who remained, the same poison that scattered the Jewish people to the winds and made us foreigners in our own countries, that same poison cannot be allowed to fester here. In the last decade, there's been a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe, where it always seems to live and grow deep in the soil. But now, in the past few years, there's been a resurgence in America. Just last October, we watched in horror as the single greatest massacre of Jews on American soil was perpetrated by an anti-Semitic, white supremacist terrorist in Pittsburgh. Sadly, between 2016 and 17, the U.S. saw the largest increase in harassment, vandalism, and assault of Jews and Jewish institutions. I, like you, feel the same dread, the same alarm that past generations of Jews have felt when anti-Semitism rears its ugly head and begins inevitably to walk hand in hand with violence against Jews. When we read about Jewish cemeteries defaced by swastikas, when we watch white supremacists march down the streets of a proud American city chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and burn it down outside a synagogue, or when we hear about a man who walks into a kosher grocery in Paris to murder Jews, when we see or hear anti-Semitism, we have a solemn obligation not to hold our tongues or parse our language, but call it out with courage, with clarity. When someone names only prominent Jews as trying to buy or steal our elections, we must call it out. When someone says that being Jewish and supporting Israel means you're not loyal to America, we must call it out. When someone looks at a neo-Nazi rally and sees some very fine people among its company, we must call it out. When there's someone suggests that money drives support for Israel, we must call it out. We are here because we support the only Jewish state in the world and because it's in America's interest to support Israel. Any suggestion to the contrary, whether made out of malice or ignorance, is hurtful, it's wrong. We cannot be afraid to say that it's wrong and hurtful. But even more than that, these age-old anti-Semitic tropes are false and must renounce them. You can be a Jew and care about Israel, and it doesn't make you any less of an American. You can be a Jew and lobby for Israel, and it doesn't make us any less of an American. It makes you a better American. You can be all at once, my friends, completely Jewish, completely pro-Israel, and completely American. And we are. That is what makes this country so exceptional. To say anything otherwise is completely false, has no place in our public discourse. So we must call out anti-Semitism whenever we hear it, from wherever it arises. It has become too prevalent in our politics to identify anti-Semitism only when it comes from political opponents. It will always be wrong to use anti-Semitism as a political weapon, always. And let me tell you, if you only care about anti-Semitism coming from your political opponents, you are not fully committed to fighting anti-Semitism. So, my friends, in conclusion, this matters a great deal. The fact that today we must once again face down the ancient poison of anti-Semitism is a reminder of what Israel has meant to the Jewish people. It reminds me of what Israel meant to me, long before my name ever appeared on a ballot, long before I ever thought of being an elected official. As a boy, I grew up hearing stories of my great-grandmother, the matriarch of our family. In 1941, when the Nazis invaded Ukraine, then part of Galicia, they asked my grandmother to gather her children and their children on the porch of her home. They said, "You come with us." She said, "We will not leave." And they gunned down all 17 of them from age 1 to age 81. Now, as a proud grandfather myself of Noah, I carry with me the stories of 5 generations of Schumers. Schumers who did not escape the Shoah, and those who did, including my grandparents, who, feeling persecution, found sanctuary on these wonderful shores, where, because of the tolerance and openness and opportunity that courses through all American life, their grandson could stand before you as the highest elected Jewish official ever in America. And I know you join me. We all cannot help but think we are the lucky ones. I know I'm not alone in bearing the weight of these generations and the painful history of our people. Each one of us has these stories. And it is because we carry with us the history. We feel so deeply about the cause of Israel and the friendship between the United States and Israel. It is because of this history that I want Israel to be always there, always prosperous, always strong, always free. My friends, we must never forget what Israel and her freedom mean to the Jewish people and what the friendship of the United States means to securing that freedom. As long as Hashem breathes air into my lungs, I will not forget. I know you will not forget. And we will fight to protect the Jewish people here in America and in the state of Israel. In America and in Israel, Am Yisrael Chai, the people Israel live. Thank you. God bless you. AIPAC, keep up the great work.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our program. For your safety and the safety of those around you, please follow the guidance of the event staff to your designated exit. The doors